Hello, Booktube. Booktube, you're not going to see my face this morning, and the reason for that is that last night I noticed that the lower lid of my right eye was getting a little red, and this morning it's still a little red, but also a bit swollen, and I just did not feel great about coming onto camera. Instead, what I have done is I've filmed the view out of our kitchen window, because the person who watches television could also be called the person who feeds the wild birds. We have a suspended feeder that you can probably see there to the left, but we also put food on the ground. And mid-morning, and it's Sunday morning, what you're seeing now, mid-morning is about the time that the birds come down, and there's quite a bit of feeding traffic, and I've never really had a chance to watch it because I'm usually at work around the 10 o'clock time, which is when this gets exciting. So I thought, well, we'll both watch it together and do a nonfiction review. You can also see me reflected in the glass of the window there. I was making a batch of tea cakes today, so when I get those done, I'll try and take a photograph with which we can end this little video. Okay, let's carry on. Now, today's review comes to you courtesy of another Booktube creator, really, somebody that I'm going to urge you to subscribe to. Nick, and the channel is called Dr. Cranky Pants Reads. I watched his video and it was titled Reading Hacks, Making Reading Harder. Nick is a professor of elementary literacy education, and he wanted to bring his experience so that he could counter all the videos that we see on YouTube promoting techniques for what I've learned that I need to call bionic reading, ways to read faster that apparently won't sacrifice quality. He questions that, and I will leave a link in my description box to that video. Nick's words were a source of relief for me. Speed reading has been a thing since the 1970s, hasn't it? And I never tried to learn. And I never tried to learn because at gut level, I was afraid that speed reading would reduce the pleasure that I get from reading. And I couldn't bear the thought. Yet I wondered, especially when I joined Booktube and there were all these creators who seemed capable of reading double or treble the number of books that I could. How did they get 100 books read per year? And there's me with my measly 3 to 4 books per month, occasionally 5, depending. Nick recommended a number of books about the science of literacy, and he relieved me by making the case that faster reading cannot be good reading. And this is my review of one of his recommendations. The book we will look at today is Language at the Speed of Sight, How We Read, Why So Many Can't, and What Can Be Done About It, by Mark Seidenberg, published in 2017 by Hachette Book Group. Now, could I pitch this book? I think Mark Seidenberg can do it better. So I've gone to his faculty page, which includes the usual summary of his research interests, and I'm going to quote from that summary. My research is concerned with basic questions about the nature of language and how it is acquired, used, and represented in the brain. It has 2 complementary parts. One part concerns reading, a particular use of language. My main interest is in how reading skill is acquired by children and the causes of dyslexia. I am also committed to exploring how the science of reading can contribute to improved educational performance. As part of that effort, I am studying the persistently low reading achievement of minority children, many of whom are from low-income backgrounds. And that quote could serve perfectly as a back cover write-up for Language at the Speed of Sight. Regarding the author, Mark Seidenberg, he looks about my age, but I couldn't find any information. Again, a lot of people seem to be protecting their privacy more online. I do know that he grew up in Chicago. He studied to PhD level at Columbia University, and he currently holds a professorship in the Department of Psychology at the University of Wisconsin. But we can spend more time talking about this book's structure because I think it really does intend to give you the maximum possible ability to investigate the subject of reading, and particularly children learning reading and how the brain learns to read. The Kindle version that I bought is 461 pages long, but to show just how resource-rich this book is, only 367 pages of that are actually the text. After you get through the acknowledgements and a few pages of media quotes, there are 30 pages of references. And within that last section, Seidenberg has highlighted 67 publications that he considers readable and of particular interest on the subject of teaching reading or neuroscience or cognition. After you get past the references, there's then 51 pages of notes, and a few of those expand on the issue at length, maybe for a page or two. In addition to that, Seidenberg then includes a link to his personal website, and go there, because if you're interested in reading or teaching reading, it's a treasure trove of links to other articles, recorded talks, interviews, resources from other educational experts, and other websites, including Seidenberg's research site. So finally, after all that, there's a 26-page subject index. So that's the non-text stuff, which is, I think, probably the most impressive offering I've seen in a work of nonfiction. The text itself then is divided into 12 chapters. And so what I'm going to do is, because some people have said they like this, is I'm going to try and summarize the content in a sentence or two and put that up on screen for you. Starting with chapter 1, The Problem and the Paradox. Seidenberg uses this chapter to introduce himself, his expertise, and the specific issues around reading that he wants to address. Chapter 2, Visible Language, that discusses the differences between speech and text and also sign languages. Chapter 3, Writing, It's All Mesopotamian Cuneiform to Me, traces the history of the invention and development of different writing systems. Chapter 4, The Eyes Have It. This it goes into the results of the research into eye movement when reading, and it debunks popular claims that you can increase reading speed and eliminate subvocalization. I found that a really valuable chapter. And then chapter 5, if you can read this, you can get a good job in reading research. I will quote from the text for this to describe what the chapter's about. Learning to read is the process of acquiring the several types of statistical knowledge that support rapid and efficient comprehension. Seidenberg compares the ways our brains learn to speak and read with the deep learning capabilities we now have via computers to gather, analyze, and find patterns in data. Chapter 6, Becoming a Reader. This examines how children learn to read, which factors are crucial for making the process begin well, with particular emphasis on the process of understanding how text and speech relate to each other. Chapter 7, The Eternal Triangle. This was a very good chapter again for me. Seidenberg presents a three-way diagram to discuss the interrelationship between our knowledge of spoken language, or phonology, our knowledge of written language, or orthography, and our knowledge of meaning and context, semantics in other words, which all of those have to be developed to make someone a good reader. And some research results show how experienced readers actually make use of that knowledge. Chapter 8, Dyslexia and its Discontents. Seidenberg opens out the full complexity of dyslexia as a diagnosis, how difficult it is to diagnose. And this chapter stresses the need for careful evaluation of all factors which might be having an impact on the individual child who is not learning to read as easily as others of their age. Chapter 9, Brain Bases of Reading. Seidenberg uses studies of dyslexia acquired as the result of brain injury to elaborate on how the brain structures itself to perform all the tasks that are needed for experienced reading. And then chapter 10, How Well Does America Read? This is Seidenberg taking an in-depth look at the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA tests, and the National Assessment of Educational Progress, called the NAEP, or Nations Report Card. He examines who administers the tests, comments on how rigorous or not the testing methods are, and addresses some arguments made about whether or not to use the test results. Chapter 11, The Two Cultures of Science and Education. This is another really good chapter. It's a short history of the development of education as an academic specialization and the reasons why it has not collaborated with other specialities, particularly neuroscience, in order to improve teaching methods. And then finally, chapter 12, Reading the Future, Seidenberg gives his ideas for better ways forward. Let's talk about how I got this book and how much it cost really quickly. I downloaded the Kindle edition on the 23rd of November while I was listening to Nick's video. I paid £3.99. The paperback would have cost me £12.99. The ebook costs more if you're buying it in America from Amazon.com. It's $13.99, and the paperback is $14.39. Now, of course, that question we always ask, why did I choose to read this book? It's a good question. I learned to read before I started school, but of course I wasn't aware exactly how I learned what I learned. I know I had, courtesy of my paternal grandparents, the complete set of long play records and workbooks that were put together by Dorothy Taft Wilson called Listen and Learn with Phonics. That was an American thing. I'm posting a picture of the whole set, which I saw on eBay. I was very tempted to buy it just for nostalgia reasons. Nobody organized any formal lessons with me, however. So somehow, just by playing the records myself and looking at the workbooks, I must have figured it out. And so I started school able to read. And I did not remember, therefore, how reading was actually taught in school because I didn't need the teaching. I could see that children around me were struggling, and I found that puzzling, as I would do. I didn't know what was happening or not happening. Sometime in the late 90s, I then became aware of this debate going on within elementary education about what was the best way to teach reading. And one side was backing, including the teaching of phonics, and the other side was insisting that phonics teaching was not helpful, and they were championing a different teaching method, which was called whole word recognition or whole word. I have been curious for a while about this debate, because it's hard for me to accept that phonics isn't helpful based on the fact that I remember playing with this Dorothy Taft Wilson record and workbook set. But at the same time, I was only 4 or 5 years old then. So how objective could my opinion be? So the neuroscience fascinates me. How the brain works fascinates me. And every book I've read about cognition science or neuroscience has taught me something I did not know. And this one was one of those also. Have I encountered anything unexpected or interesting? Well, interesting, my word. This is just a small sample of things I now know that I didn't know before reading Seidenberg's book. Firstly, eye movement. I had never thought about how my eyes move when I'm reading silently or aloud. It doesn't really matter which, but silent. This was mostly talking about silent reading. During the early 2000s, researchers found a way to track eye movements. And it turns out that the eyes of good readers can jump along a line of text, reading about 20 characters in a jump before they stop for a fraction of a second, then makes the next jump. And where there's any confusion or need to check something that was already read in order to understand the new text, the eye will also jump back. Now, I find that having read all this and also having watched a video, I'll include a link in my description box to a video that shows this tracking in action while a child is reading. But I find now that I occasionally notice consciously my own reading jumps, and I'm finding that interesting. The second thing that was helpful to me was dyslexia is a subject that I never needed to understand beyond the fact that dyslexia implies some degree of difficulty learning to read. But I really appreciated the detailed discussion in Chapter 8 of the different ways that dyslexia alters brain function and how the wrong diagnosis of the root problem just adds to the child's experience of failure. And I was encouraged by the research which suggests that very young children can be assessed for their risk of becoming dyslexic or being dyslexic, and that could allow for earlier intervention. The third thing I learned was how many areas of the brain are involved when we read. Early on, Seidenberg just trashes the myth, you've all heard this, that most of us only use 10% of our brain capacity. He says, no, way more than 10% is needed just to read. And finally, I think the concept of depth or shallowness when applied to language if you don't know this, let me try and explain. A language that is shallow is one that has very few exceptions to its spelling or pronunciation rules. And so I was made to understand that languages like Finnish, Spanish, Italian, Turkish, Ukrainian, and Welsh are all shallow languages. It sounds like an insult, but what it means is they would be easier to learn because they have fewer exceptions to their own rules. So it will surprise no one at all who's learned English, that English is a deep language, meaning it is full of words which contradict its own rules, and therefore extra learning is required to understand those exceptions. Is there anything readers should be prepared for if they decide to read this book? The vocabulary. The vocabulary and the writing style employed in this book were chosen, I think, to demonstrate academic proficiency to other academics. I could use the triangle diagram from chapter 7, if I wanted to illustrate why this can make the book a challenge to readers who don't have an academic speciality, or they have a different one, right? There is a high volume of specialist terms and acronyms used. A reader who's got good orthological and phonological skills will be able to pronounce the terms correctly, even if they've never seen the words before. To the best of my memory, Mark defines most of his terms once within the book. Once wasn't often enough for me to absorb that much new vocabulary and also draw full meaning from the text. If I were rating myself out of 10, I'd say that my understanding varied between sort of level 6 and 7. Even so, a level 6 understanding got me a lot of new knowledge. If you are really curious about reading and literacy, I believe that even if you're not an academic specialist, and even if you find the book in places a little hard going, you will still learn enough from Seidenberg's book to make it worth your while. And any ideas for related or follow-up reading? Well, I want to name another recommendation from Nick at Dr. Cranky Pants Reads from the same video, Proust and the Squid by Marianne Wolfe. This book covers some of the territory Seidenberg does, examines the fact that humans did not always read, but Wolfe is interested in exactly how reading changed human brains and talks about the implications for our time when it could be said that we are at a historical turning point when the reading brain could become a digital brain. I would like to know more about what she has to say about that. And that's another review done. I can see the birds have pretty much done their breakfast now. It's quieted down. So the next time you will hear from me, it'll be 2025. I haven't put together one of those scripts for a video where you talk about your 2025 plans, because there isn't anything that I have planned which starts in 2025. I have started something new, which will take up most of 2025, and it's exciting enough to talk about. So I might combine that with a tag or show off the books I got for Christmas, or anything that buys me a few more days, really, because I'm in the middle of 2 books right now. I'm not ready to give you another review on Thursday. But I hope that everyone watching will have a great reading year in 2025. So everybody, please take care. See you again soon. Bye-bye.